The hearing room was colder than it should have been, the kind of cold that made breath hang for half a second in the air, not because of the temperature but because of what was about to unfold. Every inch of the Oversight Committee chamber was primed for confrontation. The velvet carpet muffled footsteps, but the tension screamed. It throbbed in the silence, in the distant clicks of journalists' cameras being calibrated, in the quiet shuffles of note-taking aides pretending not to look up. And then the door opened, flanked by a pair of sharply suited lawyers and trailed by a handler carrying a thick leather binder. Former President Donald J. Trump strode in, eyes half shielded by the golden glow of the cameras. He didn't smile, he didn't need to. His entrance was spectacle enough, orchestrated like a return to a throne. Crockett didn't move. She sat at the center of the long, curving table. Chairwoman now, no longer underestimated freshman. Her arms rested calmly on the wood, her fingers laced, her face a portrait of stillness. She was dressed in royal blue, not the red she often wore on CNN appearances, deliberate, measured. She was done playing the media's game. This was her courtroom now. Their eyes met, not for long. Just long enough for the chamber to hold its collective breath. The glance was not aggressive, not performative, but the weight behind it carried history. The weight of two Americas staring each other down, one defiant in its entitlement, the other unbending in its rise. Trump took his seat behind the microphone with the slow, performative confidence of someone who believed they were still untouchable. He glanced sideways at his leer, gave a nod, then leaned back slightly, hands folded, elbows resting lazily on the arms of the chair. The gallery whispered. In the back rows, press members began tapping out early tweets. Trump appears unfazed. Crockett stone-faced. Fireworks coming. On the dais, Representative Kearns cleared his throat and tapped the gavel once. This Oversight Committee hearing will now come to order. Still, Crockett didn't move, not until she had to. The clerk began roll call. The room shifted from silence to protocol. Names were called, voices responded. Formalities were underway. Trump whispered something to his lawyer, smirking faintly. Crockett ignored it. Instead, her focus rested on the thick binder in front of her. Inside were printed briefings, intelligence transcripts, timelines, handwritten notes, and two highlighted statements from Trump's former national security advisor. She'd spent weeks preparing, not to destroy him, not to humiliate him, but to show the country what a man like him looked like when stripped of his performance. She wasn't here to fight him on his terms. She was here to reveal the quiet collapse of power, and the cost of letting it go unchallenged. The gavel echoed again. Chairwoman Crockett, Kearns said, you may proceed. She stood. Not with flourish, not with aggression. She stood like a woman who knew the weight of this moment and welcomed it. The cameras leaned in. Pens stopped scribbling. Trump lifted his chin. Crockett looked up, locked eyes with the room, and spoke the first words that would begin the slow unraveling of an empire. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we are not here to entertain. We are here to remember. Her voice was calm, precise, to remember what was briefed, what was ignored, what was nearly lost because one man in the highest seat of power confused instinct with intelligence and spectacle with strategy. The room held its breath. Trump scoffed audibly. Crockett did not respond. Not yet, because this wasn't a war of volume. It was a war of memory. And she had every intention of making America remember. The hearing had only just begun, but the real war was already being waged elsewhere, in whispers, in green rooms and in war rooms scattered across D.C. down the corridor from the committee chamber. Trump's inner circle crowded into a narrow, private prep room. The blinds were drawn. The mood was part theater, part siege. Aides fumbled with printouts of intelligence briefings, while his lead attorney, Randall Price, straightened Trump's crimson tie with robotic precision. Trump glanced at his reflection in a blackened TV screen, not for vanity, but for dominance. She's a blogger, he muttered, smirking. Smart mouth, but she can't go toe-to-toe with me. The room chuckled obediently, but the smirk didn't last. He tugged at his collar. You prepped me on the Iran thing, right? He asked. voice edged with impatience. "We went over it yesterday," Price replied, "but stay general. Avoid the 2019 briefings unless she forces it." Trump nodded, but his eyes darted. Something in them betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Meanwhile, across the building, Jasmine Crockett sat in a quieter, leaner room with her chief counsel and two staffers. A whiteboard stood behind her, scribbled with dates, code names, and arrows that connected failed briefings to near crises. "She's going to bait him," said her aide Layla, flipping through the binder. "Mocking her IQ? That's coming. He wants to trigger her." Crockett didn't look up. She circled a date with her pen, October 15th, 2019, the nuclear standoff meeting. The moment it all shifted. "I'm not baited by insults," she said. Coolly, "I'm baited by what he left behind." A long pause. "Do we go for the test?" Layla asked. Crockett looked up. "Not yet. I want him to think he's winning." At that moment, a producer backstage at a major news network checked her feed. The committee hearing was trending across 3 platforms. IQ Showdown was already circulating. The media had chosen the frame intellect versus ego, but Crockett had chosen a different battlefield entirely. It wasn't about proving who was smarter. It was about proving who remembered and who conveniently forgot. The hallway lights flickered as Trump's entourage began walking toward the chamber doors. He was cracking jokes, loose in the shoulders, a man who believed the system still bent for him. Crockett, standing silently behind the entrance curtains, breathed in once, then exhaled. The war was beginning, and she didn't need to raise her voice to win it. The committee chamber was now packed. Not a single seat sat empty. Press filled the back rows, fingers ready on keys. Interns stood pressed against the walls. The air buzzed not with noise, but with tightly compressed anticipation. The chair's gavel dropped. We now resume the Oversight Committee's hearing on executive intelligence briefings, misuse, and retention protocols. Trump leaned forward, his fingers laced in front of him. His posture was practiced, equal parts kingpin and martyr. His legal counsel sat stiffly beside him, eyes darting between Crockett and the prepared statements in front of them. "Mr. Trump," the chair said, "you may proceed with your opening remarks." Trump cleared his throat theatrically. "It's good to be back in this room," he began with faux warmth. "Even though some of you would rather I wasn't, frankly, this hearing's a waste of taxpayer money, but here we are." A few Republicans chuckled. Cameras clicked. "I was one of the best presidents at handling intelligence," he continued. "No president read more, understood better, or acted faster. The people know that. You know that. The world knows that." He paused, surveying the room, letting the sentence linger as though daring someone to dispute it. Jasmine Crockett sat, unmoved, eyes on him, pen resting silently in her hand. Her expression revealed nothing, not disdain, not disbelief. Just ... readiness, Trump continued. "And I hear a lot of talk, people questioning my mind, my capacity. Some say I didn't understand things. Let me tell you something. I took a cognitive test. I passed flying colors." The doctors were shocked. He smiled to himself. "Frankly, I might be the smartest person in this room." That was it. The moment. Crockett's microphone lit red. She leaned forward slowly. Not rushed, not dramatic, but with the cool, deliberate gravity of someone about to cut through a wall of sound. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice even, "do you consider yourself intellectually equipped to process national intelligence briefings, even in their raw, unredacted form?" Trump smirked. "More than you, sweetheart." A collective hush swept the room. Some gasped. Some scribbled notes furiously. Crockett smiled faintly, not with amusement, but with precision. "That's helpful context," she replied, her voice calm as glass. "Because we're about to review moments where that confidence didn't quite match the outcome." Trump blinked. She turned to the chairman. "I'd like to enter Exhibit A, the transcript of the October 2019 nuclear alert briefing." The game had changed. The opening shots had been fired, and Crockett had just taken the first piece off the board. The screen flickered to life. A transcript appeared, stamped classified with a red mark now crossed out due to declassification. Crockett's voice remained even, controlled, but there was steel under her syllables. This is the October 15th, 2019 briefing, she said, her fingers lightly tapping the binder. The one regarding tactical responses to the Iranian nuclear acceleration. Trump leaned back, arms folded, jaw tightening. Crockett continued, according to this transcript, you were informed by your national security advisor that Iranian forces had activated a covert weapons transfer route through Basra. In response, your first recommendation, and I quote, was to send a message by hitting something close to Tehran, something they'd feel. She let the sentence hang. Trump interjected quickly. That's a distortion. We had multiple options. My people gave me options. I chose the strong one. Crockett raised an eyebrow. Sir, the option you proposed would have violated international norms and struck within 30 kilometers of a civilian population. Trump waved his hand. I remember it differently. And there it was. Crockett leaned in. That's the problem. You remember it differently. The briefing notes don't lie. The advisor's memos don't lie. But your memory, your recollection of life and death intelligence, seems to shift with your comfort. Gasps rippled across the room. The chairman called for order. Cameras zoomed in on Trump's face, a flicker of confusion shadowed behind defiance. Crockett flipped to the next page. You also suggested, again quoting, that intelligence was overrated and that you preferred to go with your gut. Trump snapped back. That's leadership. No, Crockett replied, calm as ever. That's roulette, murmurs spread. Journalists jotted down the phrase. Crockett didn't break her gaze. You don't get to gamble with national security, Mr. Trump, especially not when you're forgetting the rules while spinning the wheel. Trump leaned forward, voice rising. I knew what I was doing, she nodded slowly. That's what scares me. The courtroom fell still. It wasn't just a clash of recollections, it was a trial of memory versus consequence. A public dissection of ego cloaked in patriotic language. And Crockett was just beginning to peel the layers back. Asterisk the chamber dimmed as Crockett signaled the clerk. Play the audio file. Segment 7, she said, a scratchy, redacted recording. Began. The voice of a top intelligence officer briefing the president in the White House Situation Room. The topic: escalating nuclear movements near the Strait of Hormuz. Trump's voice echoed clearly in response. So what you're saying is, they already launched something. There was a pause on the recording. The officer clarified patiently, no, sir. We're saying they've begun enrichment acceleration. That's not a missile, more silence. Then, well, I say we launch one anyway, they'll get the message. As the tape ended, the committee room was dead quiet. Trump looked stunned, less by the content than by the fact it had been made public. He turned to his lawyer, whispering furiously. But it was too late. The damage was done. Crockett calmly placed the next exhibit on her desk. You were briefed clearly, she said. And your response showed not a failure of ideology, but a failure of comprehension. I was being decisive, Trump snapped. They respected me for it. Crockett didn't blink. You misunderstood a basic term in a nuclear security briefing, and your suggestion risked dragging the country into armed conflict based on a misinterpretation. That's not decisiveness. That's cognitive negligence. The term hit like a hammer. Cognitive negligence. Republican members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Behind them, reporters exchanged knowing glances. Trump shot back. You're twisting this. I was briefed all the time. Ask anyone. I had daily intel, more than any president. She nodded. Yes, sir. You received the briefings, but were you processing them? Her tone wasn't mocking. It was surgical. She flipped to another page. According to National Security Memo 409, you skipped over 60% of classified morning briefs in your final year, instead asking aides to just give me the gist. Trump's jaw clenched. Crockett paused. There was no gist, Mr. Trump. Not when the stakes were nuclear. Not when words like launch and enrich could mean life or death. Silence again. A silence that felt like judgment. The chair turned to Trump. Would you like to respond? He shook his head slowly. It's not how I remember it, Crockett leaned back. That, Mr. Trump, may be the most dangerous part of all. The room remained still, because this wasn't just about a moment of ignorance. It was about what happens when power forgets what it was told. And the world pays the price. Asterisk, the ripple effect was immediate. As the audio replayed on primetime networks and talk shows that night, members of the committee returned to their seats the following day walking a tightrope. The spectacle had crossed into scandal. But now came the more difficult question: what should be done about it? Representative Mallory, a senior Republican, motioned to redirect the line of questioning. Madam Chair, he said, his voice laced with false calm, I'd caution this committee against turning an intelligence briefing into a political tribunal. Crockett turned toward him slowly. With respect, Congressman, this is a tribunal, one with national implications. We are not discussing opinions. We are discussing decisions made under the illusion of clarity. Mallory retorted, are we questioning fitness or hindsight? Crockett replied, her voice like steady ice. When the consequence of hindsight is global war, the difference disappears. A murmur ran through the audience. Then came a moment of unexpected gravity. General Thomas Rourke, retired, decorated, and nonpartisan, was called in as an expert witness. He took the stand solemnly, folding his hands before speaking. I briefed President Trump personally over a dozen times. He was present, but not always engaged. The room froze. Rourke continued, on several occasions, I was asked to reduce nuclear and cyber escalation models into one-sentence summaries. When I tried to explain, I was told, don't overcomplicate it. By whom? Crockett asked. The general hesitated. By the president himself, Trump's lawyer objected. The chair overruled. Crockett's tone sharpened. General, would you describe that behavior as a lapse in protocol? He nodded. I would describe it as dangerous. Trump exploded. That's a lie. I respected the generals more than anyone. They just didn't like that I asked tough questions. Crockett let the outburst settle. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, it was without venom. No one's faulting you for asking questions, she said. We're faulting you for not understanding the answers. Dead silence. Even some Republican aides looked down. This wasn't just about Trump anymore. This was about precedent, a terrifying one. A precedent where power could be claimed, exercised, and misused by someone too proud to ask what he didn't know, or too indifferent to care. Cornered but defiant, Trump did what he had always done best, shifted the battleground. He leaned into his microphone with a smirk. You know, all this talk about intelligence. Let me remind you, I took a cognitive test. A very hard one. I passed. Doctors were amazed. They said, Mr. President, nobody gets those questions right. I did. All of them. The audience stirred. Eyebrows rose across the room. His lawyers exchanged nervous glances. Crockett blinked, not in disbelief but in recognition. She'd been expecting this. Trump continued, frankly, I don't think a lot of people in this room could pass that test. Maybe even you, Madam Chair. He pointed toward her. Casual, dismissive, performative, there it was. Crockett's face remained still. Mr. Trump, she said slowly, are you referring to the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test? He sat back proudly. Yes, that one, very difficult. I remember. The questions. Person, woman, man, camera, TV? The words hung in the air, absurd and chilling. Crockett tilted her head. With all due respect, sir, that's not an IQ test. It's a basic cognitive screening, designed to detect signs of dementia or neurological damage. The smirk faded slightly. She continued, voice calm and scalpel sharp. Passing that test doesn't make you a genius. It confirms you can recognize animals and repeat words. That's not brilliance. That's baseline function. The audience shifted, a mix of suppressed laughter and shock. Cameras zoomed in. The moment was viral before it even ended. Trump, now flustered, jabbed back. I know what it was. I passed it better than anyone. People said I had a natural mind. Crockett leaned forward. A natural mind doesn't confuse decisiveness with impulsivity. A natural mind doesn't mistake instinct for intelligence. And a natural leader doesn't use a medical screening as a weapon against oversight. Then she paused. I don't debate IQs, Mr. Trump. I debate consequences. Silence. That sentence, I debate consequences, echoed across the room like a gavel striking marble. Even members of his party sat frozen, unsure whether to defend or retreat. Crockett had shifted the hearing from personal insult to philosophical indictment. This wasn't about brains anymore. It was about responsibility, about what kind of mind and what kind of man should hold nuclear power in his palm, and what happens when that power is wielded by someone who mistakes recall for wisdom. The chamber, already simmering from Crockett's precise dismantling of Trump's IQ flex, now slid into something colder, something quieter. A courtroom that had been pulsing with spectacle began to shift into stillness. Crockett adjusted her mic. Let's talk about the final quarter of your presidency, Mr. Trump, specifically your cognitive transparency. Trump scoffed. I was more transparent than any president. Nobody was tested like me, asked the doctors. The best. She held up a document. This letter was written by Dr. Arvind Menon, your White House physician during your final months in office. It was never released publicly until today. Gasps. Reporters leaned forward. Crockett continued, her voice unshaken. In it, Dr. Menon expresses concern that during the months of November and December 2020, your cognitive response time and information retention noticeably declined under stress. He also noted, and I quote, the subject exhibits fixation on simplified narratives, resistance to structured briefing formats, and inconsistent recall of key names and events. Trump erupted. Fake letter, that's a fake. I never even had a doctor name that. Crockett replied smoothly. He signed your annual physical, twice. The letter was projected on the screen. The signature, unmistakably real. Crockett pressed on. I'm not here to humiliate you. Mr. Trump, I'm here to understand whether you were ever fit to carry the nuclear codes during a moment of transition, civil unrest and global tension. He leaned in, teeth gritted. You're trying to make this about my brain. You think I'm stupid. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her folder and pulled out a photo. Trump seated during a national security briefing, holding a Sharpie-marked hurricane map, the infamous Alabama storm path fiasco. I think there's a difference, she said gently, between being unqualified and being unwilling to learn. The latter is more dangerous. A stunned silence. Trump's lawyer tugged his sleeve. He pulled away. Crockett sat back in her chair, not with triumph, but with a measured breath. She was not performing a takedown. She was performing an autopsy, one cut at a time. And Trump, for all his bravado, was beginning to bleed confidence. The collapse didn't come in a fall. It came in the small moments, forgotten facts, broken pride, and the realization that every room has limits, even one he once ruled as. The courtroom settled into a stunned hush, the rhythm broken only by the hum of ventilation and the scratching of pens. A shift occurred not at the witness stand, but in the gallery a woman stood, quietly. She wore a dark green blazer, her hair in thick silver curls. There was a calm force in her presence, like a book everyone had seen on the shelf but never opened. Jasmine Crockett saw her instantly. Her eyes widened just slightly, but enough for the cameras to catch. Marsha Blackburn noticed too. Reporters turned. Phones were raised. The woman stepped forward, and with permission from the judge, she handed a sealed envelope to the court clerk. State your name, the judge asked. She spoke clearly. Maya Delancey, former White House Ethics Counsel, 2017 to 2018. The room inhaled. Trump froze. His eyes narrowed. You? You were let go. You were a nobody. But Crockett knew what was coming. She had called her. Not for theatrics. For truth. The judge opened the letter. Read it. Looked up. This is a notarized affidavit? Maya nodded. Yes, I kept the original notes from my final 4 months. I was instructed to destroy them. I did not. Crockett stood. May I read the final paragraph? The judge allowed it. Jasmine's voice was steady. The former president repeatedly pressured staff to alter legal documents regarding his financial disclosures. On multiple occasions, he asked how much wiggle room the law allowed for falsified valuation. When informed there was none, he stated, "Then we'll find someone who says otherwise." Trump was flushed red now. "She's bitter. She's lying." This is character assassination, but no one moved. No one echoed him because Maya Delancey wasn't bitter. She was calm, and the paper didn't shake in her hand. "I was silent for years," Maya said. "I'm not anymore." Crockett looked at her not as a political ally, but as something rarer, a witness without ambition, a woman with nothing left to gain, and in that moment, with only the sound of pages being filed into evidence, something profound shifted. This wasn't a trial about party lines anymore. It was about the slow return of memory, of records, of people long buried under the noise. The courtroom no longer belonged to Trump. It belonged to the truth, and the truth had just stood up in the gallery. Asterisk, the lights in the courtroom felt hotter now, the cameras closer, every breath louder. Marcia Blackburn sat rigid in her chair, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had survived countless hearings, political storms, live interviews, and smear campaigns. But this was different. The gallery no longer murmured. It watched. The affidavit from Maya Delancey had not just undercut Trump, it had exposed a system of willing silence. And Blackburn, who once scoffed at ethics committees, now sat center stage in a trial not of her making but of her protection. Crockett turned slowly toward her. "Senator Blackburn," she began, "you once said that whistleblowers were tools of the deep state. Do you still believe that?" Marcia's lips parted, then shut again. Jasmine stepped forward. "Or do you now believe whistleblowers are the only reason we're not still buried under this man's mountain of lies?" Marcia's voice cracked for the first time. This isn't your twisting everything." "No, Senator," Jasmine said calmly, "I'm untwisting it." The courtroom stirred. Jasmine held up a second document. "This email," she said, "was sent from your staff to Maya Delancey's office in 2018. In it, your office asks her not to speak to the press about Trump's conflict of interest reviews. You called it, quote, counterproductive to party cohesion." Blackburn's throat worked hard. That was standard messaging. Every office does that. But not when the message is obstruction, Senator. Judge Holbrook leaned forward. "Do you deny sending that communication, Senator Blackburn?" I don't recall," Crockett cut in sharp now. "You don't recall a documented attempt to silence a federal ethics lawyer during a presidential investigation?" There was a pause, a long, hot silence. Finally, Blackburn's voice softened, tired. "It was a mistake. We were all trying to hold the party together. I didn't think it would come to this." And just like that, the room shifted again. The crowd didn't cheer. No one clapped. But they leaned in. Because they saw it, not just a crack in Trump's case, but a fracture in the armor of every loyalist who defended him too long. Marcia Blackburn, the uncheckable senator, had just admitted complicity. And Jasmine Crockett stood there, not gloating, not grinning, just watching the final wall fall, not with vengeance, with quiet, brutal truth.